So when you did it with Jim Acosta, it was different, right? It wasn't on the app.
Right. Right. No, I forget how we did it now, but it wasn't through the phone. It was with the laptop.
So you have to wait now. So it's connected, and then you wait, and people are all hopping on. So this is very good. Chris, thank you so much for doing this.
Delighted to be
everyone,
here.
Good. I mean, to everyone tuning in, I have just read Chris's excellent blockbuster about the Biden and Trump campaigns for 2024. Chris, I very much enjoyed it, and I was very interested to learn at the end of the book that this was not actually the book that you were preparing to write. You were preparing to write a book about political campaign chiefs. Is that right?
Yeah, no, look, this was not the plan. I was well into another book. And the book was about the political campaign managers, presidential campaign managers from 1968 all the way to the present. I was well into it when Joe Biden dropped out. And I called my editor at HarperCollins and I said, look, this is the political story of the century. And it's Shakespearean. It's everything. It's got everything. And it has to be done now, and I can't do both books. So why don't we push this book aside? And so luckily she was all in and off we went.
Well, it explained to me when I got to the end why there was so much of a character I haven't thought hard about for quite a while, but he's a very interesting character, the character of Paul Manafort. Because you and he clearly have a relationship. I mean, there are lots of back and forth, very interesting text messages between the two of you. And I actually had not realized until I read your book sort of how involved, even in this campaign, Manafort was. I mean, behind the scenes, but he's there, right?
Yeah, talk about a rogues gallery. I mean, Paul Manafort was the ultimate rogue. I mean, right out of prison for all kinds of crimes, with Russian oligarchs and corrupt dictators on speed dial. And all of a sudden, here he is back in the saddle. I mean, right in the midst of Trump's campaign. And then he claimed that he was stepping aside. Washington Post did a story. He said, but he didn't. He was under the radar.
Right.
And he was talking with me the whole time. We were regularly talking on Zoom. I didn't know him at all, stumbled into this. But he turned out to be a fascinating window into the campaign. And at one point, I even got a text from him on that fateful weekend right before Biden dropped out. And the text said, he's out on Monday. And I said,
yes.
What are you talking about? Was that, just a kind of a wild guess on his part? Probably, but pretty interesting. And so there's another great story that I tell in the book that I will just tease, and that involves a briefcase allegedly stuffed with $10 million in cash from a foreign dictator, and you'll have to pick up Uncharted if you want to hear the rest of that story.
Well, I was very intrigued by that story, and I was also very intrigued by how you ended it in the book. And I don't want to give anything away, but I think there's a question mark still hanging over it. I think readers are left to draw their own conclusions.
Yeah, no spoiler alert here, because look, everybody knows how the election ended. Everybody knows the ending of the story. So let's save a surprise or two. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I will. And actually, I was very interested because Paul Manafort, of the political consulting firm he had back in the day with Roger Stone and Rick Davis. I know Rick Davis and Roger, who's been on here. I know them well. I'd never met Manafort. But I will say the window that he provides you of the Trump campaign is interesting because whether or not, he was lucky, a lot of the things he says to you turn out to be right. I mean, what his observations of Kamala Harris's campaign, the fact that he said, she's not done enough to get the swing voters who would vote for her, would vote for a change candidate to come out. He was right. So I actually thought.
Yeah, no, people forget that Manafort was a very savvy political operative, as you know, going all the way back to the Reagan era. And he was the guy who basically came on board in 2016. And, when Corey Lewandowski was running the campaign, they hated each other and still do. And you can't put them in the same room together to this day. But Manafort was the guy who basically explained to Trump that why he wasn't getting all the delegates when he won a primary, for example, in Mississippi. Manafort knows that stuff cold. He worked with James A. Baker III, the legend back in the Reagan days, wrangling delegates for Jim Baker, for Ronald Reagan. So he knows his stuff, and he was a window into the campaign for me. And for example, right before the debate, he said, the ill-fated debate where Biden imploded, he said to me, "Look, this is a Hail Mary pass on their part. This is a huge gamble." And he turned out to be right.
He was right. Yes. And do you get a sense, tell me now, that he's got any influence over the president now?
No, I don't. He was talking during the campaign. He was a really interesting window into what they were doing. But now, not so much. I don't think. I could be wrong, but I think he's off. Probably making hay while the sun is shining.
Making money.
Doing international lobbying deals. I don't know that for a fact, but that's what he told me he was gonna do.
Right.
And he may be doing it with Chris LaCivita, maybe with him, as for all I know, and they're raking in the deals. But I don't think he's much of an influence on the White House. No.
Unlike his nemesis, Corey Lewandowski, who's not in the White House but is attached to the Department of Homeland Security, sort of making tabloid headlines there. I mean, I will say this, for anyone who hasn't read it, the rogues gallery, as you put it, the cast of characters around Trump and their respective feuds make for very entertaining and interesting reading.
Yeah, there was that attempted coup d'état by Corey. Corey Lewandowski tried to take Susie Wiles and Chris LaCivita down. He accused LaCivita of being a crook and siphoning off all the campaign money. Well, he lost that battle, and Susie Wiles came out on top. And if you want to, and Susie Wiles, of course, is a fascinating untold story. And
really,
and you'll get to know her in Uncharted.
I think that's right. I mean, I get the sense. I mean, I think, Chris, you're a very even-handed journalist, very even-handed writer. I think you really show, don't tell. And so, when I finished the book, I was like, I don't know which side he's on, which I think is a great thing. I wish there were more journalists out there like that.
Well, thanks. I consider that a big compliment.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very important deal. But I got the sense that you liked Susie Wiles. I felt there was some sympathy there. I mean, she's a very interesting woman, comes from a difficult family background, and you sort of say that's possibly why she's able to manage a difficult candidate, now president. She's used to dealing with difficult men.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. It goes all the way back to her father, Pat Summerall, the famous sportscaster, who was an alcoholic, and she spent a lot of time organizing interventions, family interventions, getting him into treatment. She learned, children of alcoholics, without trying to play armchair psychologist here, have sensitive antenna. They sort of learn what they can control and what they can't. And I think that came in handy when it came to dealing with Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump. And And one of the really fascinating things is how, Trump and Susie Wiles had a shared contempt for Ron DeSantis. Uh,
Yes.
DeSantis earned it. Boy, he really earned that contempt because he tried to destroy Susie Wiles for reasons that aren't clear to this day.
I was going to ask you.
After
Yes, I
Susie
wondered
Wiles
about that.
ran his winning campaign for governor.
Mm.
Inexplicably, DeSantis turned on her and his wife Casey, and they spread vicious rumors around Florida. Tried to end her career. Trump came along and rescued her. In effect, he owed her because she'd helped him carry Florida in 2016 and 2020. She was the only person who really wanted to deal with him when he was in exile. And they hit it off. And I think Trump rescued her and vice versa. I don't think Donald Trump would be president without Susie Wiles.
Wow, that's a very big statement, and it's turned out to not go so well for Ron DeSantis right now. That was politically a very bad move, it turns out, for him. But and how do you
When he dropped
did
when he dropped out of the race, by the way, Susie Wiles was usually very restrained about this kind of stuff. You won't find her on Twitter or anywhere else. But
no,
when DeSantis dropped out, she posted a 2-word message. Bye-bye.
that's very funny. And did you hear from her afterwards? Did she tell you if she read the book?
Well,
Can you say?
first of all, in the epilogue of the book, she's stunningly. I had this book. I had to turn it around, hand it in right after the election, but I had a little bit more time to do the epilogue, and I reached out to her and I got hold of her and we had a long talk. And the epilogue, I think she's stunningly candid about
Mm.
and takes no prisoners, minces no words about Kamala Harris and how she thought she was. We couldn't believe how bad she was, is what she said to me. She is refreshingly on the record with me
Record.
almost all the time, unlike her counterparts in the Biden campaign.
I thought that was really interesting. So is it Jen who wouldn't who you have the two, you go back for a reckoning with each of them,
Yeah.
and um, Susie Wiles is on the record, but Jen is not.
Well,
It goes on background.
I will share this with you for people who like to know how the sausage is made. When I quoted Susie Wiles to Jen O'Malley Dillon, Jen O'Malley Dillon was not amused, and so when I went back to her, because the whole thing was done on deep background with a quotation approval, at least with her, but not with
Mm.
Wiles, she wouldn't approve anything. So, anyway, if people can
Well,
draw their own conclusions. I think, as you say, I like to think that I was really even-handed with both, and I give Jen O'Malley Dillon credit for doing a lot of things right. I think they made a couple of really big mistakes, but I give her
yes.
credit where credit is due.
So I want to ask you about, because you do read your book and come away with feeling that the people not only around Joe Biden but around Kamala Harris were, living under a rock or something, that they were focused on the wrong. When you say at the 11th hour, they're out there focused on abortion and democracy, when that's, clearly not the priorities of the voters, of the swing voters. I mean, I was I found that stunning. But before I forget, I want to touch on something that I also found really fascinating, which is the abhorrence of the people around President Biden for the New York Times, for the mainstream media. I mean, we know how Trump feels about the mainstream media, but I must say I almost felt sorry for the New York Times.
Yeah.
I mean,
No, I mean, the Biden White House, look, I really think that White House was the most battened down, buttoned up, scripted White House in modern history. It was almost Nixonian in its contempt for the press, and especially the New York Times. If the Biden White House had an enemies list, the New York Times would have been at the top. And they were furious about the way the Times, in their view, harped on Joe Biden's age constantly, relentlessly. Now, a lot of people would beg to differ, and say they didn't do enough reporting on Biden's
Exactly.
mental acuity. But boy, the Biden camp didn't feel that way. And they felt it was a gigantic conspiracy when, after the debate, when Tom Friedman and several other columnists came out arguing for Biden to step aside, and the editorial page, they were convinced it was a gigantic conspiracy, that the Times had told everybody to get in line and write the same column, and which is nonsense. But
Yeah.
they believed it. They were
Well,
thin-skinned, they were defensive and thin-skinned from the get-go, and the campaign was, and they did themselves no favors by by being so.
yes. I mean, I would say my take on what you reported and wrote is that the wise man in the room, but frustratingly not, was Ron Klain, right? The former chief of staff. And his instincts were, and probably because he wasn't in the room, he was no longer there, so he had a bit of perspective, was sort of pushing them in a direction they did not want to go. I mean, they come across as.
Yeah, Ron
But what I
Klain
was going to say, they come.
Klain is a fascinating character at the heart of the book. And he's the book is in a way, the mystery at the heart of the book is the stunning extent of the delusion and denial that Biden's inner circle were operating under, convinced, even as they watched that debate unfold, that Biden could be the nominee and win re-election. And Ron Klain, as you know, in the book, gives me the whole day by day, hour by hour, blow by blow account of the preparation at Camp David, which nobody else has reported on. And it was stunning, the extent to which Biden was out of it, obsessed with foreign leaders, couldn't really talk about his second term plans, wandered out and fell asleep in a chair by the pool and fell sound asleep. And yet, here's Ron Klain, former White House chief of staff, very savvy. I know something about White House chiefs and wrote about him. Very savvy, brilliant guy. 3 weeks after that debate, was still fighting behind the scenes to keep Joe Biden at the head of the ticket. Thought he could prevail by rallying the progressives, walking out on the White House lawn with AOC and the rest of them, and would somehow be able to win re-election and govern for another 4 years. It was stunningly delusional for a guy who's so smart.
Well, they were all. I mean, all the people around him come across as. I think at one point you might use the word insular, or it's the word I thought of. I mean, just myopically focused on the man in front of them and not seeing the big picture. But the same almost then could be said of the people running Kamala Harris's campaign. I mean, when you see the way you lay out the narrative of that, it's in a way so simple. She needed to be the candidate of change. And yet, she needed to present something that was different from the Biden era. And she just didn't do that. And, it felt to me, reading your book, as if the people around her weren't necessarily giving her, again, seeing the big picture.
Yeah. No, it was the irony here, contrary to some other reporting that's out there. I know because I had access to Biden's inner circle. The irony here is that Biden gave her a green light to do whatever she had to do. He got on the phone, he called her, and he said, look, not in so many words, but he said essentially, do what you have to do. Don't worry about hurting my feelings. Her chief of staff, Lorraine Voles, went to visit, and Jen O'Malley Dillon went to see Jeff Zients in the White House, the White Chief of Staff for Biden. Zients said the same thing. Hey, Do what you have to do. Go for. You got to win this. Um, she couldn't do it. She was prepared. In fairness to her staff, she was prepared for that question that came on the View at ABC. But that's a softball that came right over the plate
Yeah.
that she completely whiffed on. Said, "I can't think of a single thing," when they asked her how she would govern differently. Look, in fairness, not easy to be the change candidate in a change election when you're the incumbent vice president. Ask Hubert Humphrey if he were still alive. You know, he tried, he broke with, but he actually broke with Lyndon Johnson in 1968 on the conduct of the Vietnam War, and almost caught Richard Nixon in a photo finish. For whatever reason, and I'm told it was personal loyalty on her part that she just couldn't throw Biden under the bus. It was Kamala Harris's decision not to go there.
Did you get any feedback from, Democrat political consulting world? Because I mean, obviously now they've got to regroup and come up with a candidate and a message. And, with the midterms, at some point coming up. I mean, do you get the sense? I mean, did anyone come and talk to you from that world after reading your book? Or, I mean, do you get a sense that they've taken on board the mistakes of what happened?
Well, I think a lot of them were not only have taken it on board, but were taking it on board in real time. I mean, they baffled and mystified when, for example, the Harris campaign couldn't answer that devastating trans ad that was so effective against her, and it was reminiscent of John Kerry in 2004 when they came at him with Swift Boat Veterans for Truth, that devastating commercial campaign that called him a liar and a traitor essentially in Vietnam, and he never answered it because his campaign was broke. Harris had, they spent $2 billion,
Mm.
but they couldn't answer that trans ad, and that was devastating in real time. So, but anyway, going forward, I think obviously the Democrats have a big advantage going forward because um, the Democrats in 2028 will be the change candidates. Whoever that nominee is will be the change candidate. And I think it'll be another change election in all likelihood, the way things are pointing. Um, and so, but I think that candidate needs to be really compelling and authentic. And one of the criticisms of Kamala Harris, certainly from the Trump campaign's point of view, was that she was not authentic. She was not, and say what you will about AOC and Bernie Sanders, they're authentic. That's why I think
Yes.
they're touching. They're really catching lightning in a bottle out there. Um, but I'm with Rahm Emanuel. I don't think real people in diners talk about oligarchy. That's just
Right.
so I think they could have a better message, but they're resonating because they're authentic.
Yeah. So I am obviously, given the books I've written, intrigued by your mentions. Jared and Ivanka come up come up quite a few times in your book, and you go see them in their house in Washington to begin with. And it's a small detail, but I was intrigued by it because you call her Ivanka Kushner,
Yeah,
which
she does. She does
well,
too. I mean,
I'm fascinated by that.
yeah, she'll go both ways. Ivanka Trump, Ivanka Kushner. I think it's all the same to her. Um, it was fascinating to. I mean, nobody was more shocked than I was to get an email up from the White House in 2017. My book on the White House Chiefs of Staff had just come out, The Gatekeepers,
Hmm.
and it was well timed, I think, because people were looking at what was going on in the Trump White House and saying, "Wait a minute, is this the way it's supposed to work?" And my book came out, and I think that. So I went down and I met with them. Um, wanting to learn more about them and their influence on the Trump White House. I think that they wanted. I think Ivanka. They were great listeners. I mean, they were just soaking it all. Whatever I had to say, they were trying to learn from. And anyway, they were fascinated, especially Ivanka, that other White Houses had been so dysfunctional in the past. I think there was kind of a misery loves company
Mm.
aspect to this on Ivanka's part, because they were going through a lot. And I think in Jared's case, I think he was trying to navigate a incredibly fractious, dangerous White House, as we all know. In that first term, he
Yeah.
had plenty of rivals and enemies in that White House, and I think he was just looking to learn what he could about how they're supposed to run.
Well, I have to say that, the thing that I have always thought, and you're going to be shocked that what I'm about to say, that was most appealing about Jared and Ivanka is their relationship, their very obvious, deep um, love for one another. And I did. It's hard not to be moved by the scene that you write when you go to see them in their house in Kalorama, and they sit there holding hands, talking
Yeah,
to you.
yeah.
I mean, it's quite a moment.
Yeah,
Um,
no, it's they're very close. Obviously, they have a very strong relationship, and it's fascinating though to me that they appear to have really stepped away, because I think, boy, they were both so invested in that first term, and I think Ivanka was. Remember that rally on the South Lawn that she gave right before the 2020 election? Jared took very seriously his role as a diplomat and the Abraham Accords. He really worked hard on his memoir of that first term, and so it's a little surprising I mean, as far as I can tell, they've really stepped away.
no, they really have. Do you have any? I mean, yeah. I mean, you have any thoughts on why?
I just think that it was, it's speculative on my part because I haven't spoken to them recently, but I think that was just that took a real toll, particularly on Ivanka, that first term. I think they didn't want to go through all of that Sturm and Drang again, and maybe Jared would have, but I don't think Ivanka wanted to.
No, it's very, very, very interesting. And then I wanted to ask you about Jill Biden, because I'm very, we've got coming up Alex Thompson and Jake Tapper's book again about, all that, they're reporting on, sort of the cover up in the Biden
Yeah.
White House and how it was missed. And so I was curious what you learned about the role of Jill Biden, and I can see that you were focused on doing a book, presumably on Susie White, on the political operatives, and then Biden steps down. You weren't focused on Jill Biden in your reporting, but what is your feeling? I mean, you must have come across when you were finishing the book, and since then, I mean, what have you heard about her role in the whole thing?
Well, to me, the most stunning moment of the campaign with Jill Biden was that right after the debate, when they went back to the Atlanta hotel and she went up on that stage in front of some baffled supporters and said essentially what a terrific job he'd done. You answered every question. She was gushing about it. It was talk about being in the depths of a delusion. I think she was obviously clearly an enabler of Joe Biden running for a second term. I think she was fully supportive, as far as I know. We can't know what happened behind closed doors, but you you brought up the other book that's coming out at the end of May. I wouldn't wait for it. I'd go out and read Uncharted if I were
Oh, yeah.
watching this. But having said that, why wait? But having said that, I have a slightly different take. I think a little bit more nuanced. But I'm looking forward to their take on it. And I'm an admirer of Alex Thompson. I think he's terrific.
Yeah.
But I don't think this was a classic cover up in the Watergate sense of the word, because this was not Woodrow Wilson, to mix my presidencies now. This was not Woodrow Wilson incapacitated, sitting in a corner, non compos mentis, while other people ran the White House. Joe Biden, behind closed doors, was often absolutely at the top of his game, even on the day that he abdicated, quote unquote, on July 21. He was on the phone that morning, parsing every detail of a complicated multi-nation prisoner swap.
Mhm.
There's story after story after story of Joe Biden being on top of everything. I mean, one guy who was not a Biden loyalist, but was with him all the time, and on most calls to foreign leaders, said that he couldn't believe how forceful and on it Biden was with Bibi Netanyahu right after October 7, and he thinks Biden prevented a wider Middle Eastern war. So these are kind of inconvenient facts for people who want to say that this was a gigantic conspiracy, as Karl Rove calls it, that
Mm.
everybody knew that Biden could not function. It's just not true. They Mike Donilon, his closest political advisor and alter ego, to this day, if you were to sit down with him, he'll look you in the eye and say, the Democratic Party lost its mind. They walked away from the guy the greatest vote getter in American history, and he could have won this race and governed for another 4 years. I think that's delusional. But I don't think, but I believe he believes it.
Absolutely fascinating. And
Which is not to say, by the way, that there wasn't a cover up of Joe Biden on the campaign trail. So, there's no question about the fact that he was a shadow of himself on the campaign trail. He couldn't campaign the way he once had. And I have this scene in the book, as you know, where a campaign operative from the 2020 campaign comes and interviews for a job in the 2024 campaign. She's in the Oval Office with Biden and his aides when the conversation takes this unexpectedly candid turn. And one of them says to her, one of the aides, well, back in 2020, we had COVID as an excuse. We could keep them in the basement.
yes,
What do we do now? It was this
yeah,
incredible moment. I mean, so there's no doubt about it that and they hid him from me when I was writing a book. I wanted to interview him, and they said, fine, email your questions and we'll send written answers back. That should have been a clue.
yes,
They didn't trust Biden to be in the same room with a reporter. So there you have it.
there you have it. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about the infamous George Clooney scene in your book. My reading of it, and maybe I read it too quickly, is that it isn't clear to me that George Clooney was influenced by Barack Obama to write his piece in the New York Times. I mean, am I reading that right? That
No,
it's
we have
left.
no proof. We have no proof
Yes.
of that. There's no question about it. But when he was accused of it, and when Mika Brzezinski went on Morning Joe and said, in this really kind of amazing segment, said that she thought that Barack Obama had put him up to writing that devastating op-ed. Right afterwards, a good friend of George Clooney's who works at Morning Joe, I changed just one detail of the story. I called him a producer. He was not, but he was a friend of George Clooney's who works at Morning Joe. His phone went off, and Clooney was on the phone and launched into this F-bomb laden tirade that went on, and then he hung up and then called him back again. It went on all day. So, look, Clooney says the phone call never happened. He knows it happened. Um,
Right.
but, and does it prove that Barack Obama put him up to it? Not at all. I mean, readers can draw their own conclusions, but clearly this was something he was pretty sensitive about. Let's put it that way.
Yes. Now, what are you working on now, Chris? Are you doing another book?
So I am. I've gone back to the book that I'd started before Joe Biden dropped out of the race, and I decided I had to drop everything and write the political story of the century, which is what Uncharted is, I think. But I've gone back to the other book, and it's going to be, I think, a terrific book. It's one I've been wanting to do for a long time. It's about the presidential campaign managers from '68 to the present.
Well, you've got plenty of
Talk about a rogues gallery, another
material.
rogues gallery.
Yeah, you really have.
Starting with Bill Casey and John Mitchell, and going through Carville and Rove and Lee Atwater and all the way up to Jen O'Malley Dillon. So it's quite a cast of characters.
Well, I'm already looking forward to that. But meanwhile, hopefully you're going to be on Substack as well. So
Yes,
we'll all be seeing. Yeah.
absolutely. With your help, yeah.
Yes. So I think we all want to encourage that. I can't thank you enough, Chris, for your time and for writing this fabulous book.
Thank you,
Everyone,
Vicky.
go. You're very, very welcome. Everyone, go and buy it. It's called Uncharted. Chris, thank
Thanks so
you.
much. Thank you.
Bye.
See ya.